Good afternoon, grasshoppers. I wanted to touch base with you on our assignments coming up the week of the 18th, which is next week. And you're going to be reading chapter 5 in Justice. And this is on the probably one of the, or considered the most brilliant philosopher of the modern era, and Immanuel Kant. And once again, you pronounce his name Kant, not Kant. And I, I find that Kant can be a difficult read. I think that Sandel does a very, very good job of bringing this down to accessibility. But there are some important points that Sandel makes that I think are very important. The notion of the categorical imperatives, the two formulations of it. Um, you're going to want to make sure you know those. His Kant's notion of what is justice is very important, and so you're going to want to make sure that you're reading that carefully. And uh, the examples that are afforded in the book um, are very good in terms of what Kant is against, in terms of utilitarianism, in terms of uh, uh, the notion of libertarianism, and why he finds those morally problematic. You're going to want to make sure you know that. The notion of um, totally viewing morality from the position of reason, and the categorical notions that are uh, applied as opposed to the hypothetical notions. When I was undergrad, we called it hypothetical, and Sandel uses that terminology as well. And so I want you to make sure you're reading this chapter very carefully. I know it sounds a little around the corner, but you probably would do yourself a big favor if you scan through it, maybe, jot a note or two, and then put it down, and then come back to it, and then go through it with your yellow marker or whatever. Um, the quiz for this chapter is lengthy. There are 43 questions, and it's fairly detailed. So you're going to want to please make sure that you're very familiar with this chapter. I think this is one of the more important chapters on one of the more important philosophers that we chat about in ethics. And it's very straightforward, in my opinion. The um, the notions of the categorical imperative, uh, also the notion of what does freedom mean for Kant, and I like his notion when we, like animals, seek pleasure or the avoidance of pain, we aren't really acting freely. Well, there's a very sound reason for that. And that is just a sort of reaction to, internal drives and things of that nature. And so we're not in control there. You're going to love Kant. If you read through this and you study this the way you ought to, and you're going to do well on the quiz. There are a couple of questions that you need to pay very close attention to the language of the question, and that's something that as a philosopher, as a critical thinker, you ought to be doing in any event. But in this particular quiz, I have emphasized that in several different places. So please make sure you're reading the question carefully, you're thinking about it, you've got 90 minutes to get this quiz done, and it'll auto close at the deadline. I just want to share with you that over the course of next week, this is what you're going to be working on. And I love this chapter. I think it's important. And if you have any questions, drop me an email. The couple of the examples that Sandel gives in terms of sexual behavior, very interesting. Kant almost comes across as a prude. But at the end of the day, his rationale is very important for us to understand. And I think that we have lost sight of that distinction in our contemporary world, such that we have become, I want to say, all too familiar with using people as a means to an end rather than viewing them as an end in themselves, and the notion of respecting the individual dignity of the person that we're with, and what is the whole notion of sexuality to represent. Kant's very clear about that, and you'll find that very interesting. The notion of suicide, again, another issue that Sandel brings up, and it's interesting how Kant addresses that, or the rationale that he has for why it's always objectionable to take your own life. The at the end of this chapter, there is a nice segue into the following chapter. I like the way Sandel does that. It's at the very end, the very last page of the chapter, where he segues from Kant into another of the probably one of the more important philosophers of the 20th century, John Rawls. And John Rawls was very instrumental in developing moral theory, and it's very unique, and it's one that I personally subscribe to as just very, very insightful. That's coming up the following section. So, do yourself a favor this week, this coming week, and please read through this chapter carefully and ingrain this in your head, and you'll be fine on the quiz. But more importantly, you'll understand Kant a lot better, because quite frankly, most people don't. So, if you have any questions, I think you're doing a great job, and I am almost finished with the social dilemma papers, and for the most part, I think you've just done a good job on that. That film is so important, and I wish that we had been in class, because in the physical classes I had, we spent a considerable amount of time chatting about that film and what does it mean to you. And I think that that's the big issue that comes out of that. What does it mean to you? What do you need to do to work against some of the insidious things that are going on with the internet and social media? So, there you go. Have a good weekend. Have a good week. And if you have any questions, drop me a line, and I'll talk to you soon.